Hi all, welcome to The Wife of Caesar. My name is Michel Bien, or Michel Bien, either's fine. As you know, The Wife of Caesar is Streiner's project to talk about corruption or anti-corruption using everyday words so that we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives with a little bit more than just good intentions. As usual, we will have a piece of news, a case, and a typology. Today's news has to deal with the seemingly everlasting impeachment of President Donald Trump. Now, the news today, the news is that the process of impeachment has advanced from the House of Representatives and is awaiting Senate vote and approval. Now, that's the news. However, we thought it would be interesting to talk about the process of impeachment because we have seen a lot of misinformation and fake news surrounding this entire process, and we wanted to shed some light on this, this whole idea or this whole legal concept so that you can understand it. And when it is your turn to issue an opinion, you may have a more informed opinion. Now, this word impeachment comes from the French impecher, which in turn comes from the Latin impedire. Now, that means literally to fetter or to place someone's feet in shackles so that they cannot move. So when you hear impede, you know what that means. Okay, so this process, that's literally, conceptually, it is the legal process by which the legislative body, this is in the US, the legislative body of the US investigates, processes, tries, and eventually removes a president from office. Now, impeachment can be applied to any civil servant, but the rules for impeachment for a president are much more complex. And obviously, this is what you want to learn, right? This is what you're interested in, so this is what we're going to talk about. Impeachment as it applies to the office of the president. Now, there are two parts to the process, sometimes three, depending on the situation. Let's go to the first part. The first portion, or part A, happens in the House of Representatives, and it entails, number one, a debate on the investigation. Now, this debate this comes about because in the news, or for whatever reason, the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives has news of the president misbehaving, committing improper acts. Now, this could be because of the news, because of other felonies, because of other investigations, prosecutions, indictments, you name it. It doesn't matter how, but they get wind that the president is doing something improper or inappropriate. And so they first debate whether or not they're going to investigate it. Now, the Judiciary Committee is not the entire House. It's a portion or a subset of the House of Representatives. It's just a smaller group. And this Judiciary Committee gets together and they have a debate on whether or not to formally investigate. If they decide that they want to investigate, then they vote. Again, this is also within the Judiciary Committee, so this tiny subset of the House of Representatives. If they vote to move ahead with the investigation, then they begin that investigation. And that investigation entails gathering evidence, essentially anything that can be of proof and of assistance in drafting the articles of impeachment. Now, this means that this can be testimony, documents, recordings, anything, any sort of evidence, right? So they gather evidence in this process of investigation, and if the evidence is persuasive, then they draft what are known as articles of impeachment. Now, this word articles is just a fancy word of saying charges. They are just the written charges stating that we believe that the president committed this and this and this act. And every act is one charge and thus one article. After that, the articles are voted on. Now, again, this all is taking place within the Judiciary Committee. So somebody drafts the articles of impeachment, and then the Judiciary Committee votes on those articles, essentially approves the articles, approves the charges brought against the president. And then we move on to the fourth step. The articles, these charges, are then approved by a majority of the House. So now you have a vote of the entire House of Representatives, and the Judiciary Committee, the tiny subset of the House, presents the charges or articles to all of the House, and they vote. Now, this has to be voted on by a majority. That means 50% plus one. And if 50% plus one of the House of Representatives votes for impeachment, then the process moves on to the Senate. Now, this is where we are right now, as of December 23rd, 2019. Now here, technically, you can say that the president has been impeached. However, that doesn't mean that he's been removed. To impeach is literally to bring, again, to fetter someone, to bring, to impede someone. So to bring the formal charges. But that doesn't, it might be akin to an indictment, but being indicted is not the same as being convicted. Being impeached is not the same as being removed. So again, today, technically, the president has been impeached, but he is still in office. Now, the next steps, and this will happen, the Senate is having a break for the year's end. So this will take place, or this process will resume in January, but the Senate will then have to vote, and they will hold a political trial. Now, this is tricky because the Senate ceases to work in this process. The Senate ceases to work or to function as a legislative body, and then becomes or is impaneled into a jury. Each senator is a juror, and the whole Senate becomes the jury. The proceedings are presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So this is, again, kind of tricky. Even though this is a legislative body, they are impaneled into a jury and they conduct a trial. And in this trial, a member of the judiciary, separate power, is impaneled as a judge, and he or she presides over the proceedings. So it's a mixed process, mixed concerning the branches of government that are involved. Now, once this jury is impaneled, all the evidence is presented. It's essentially a trial. All the evidence is presented. All the witnesses, if any, are called. The person on trial has a chance to rebuff. It's an entire process, but essentially think of it as a regular trial. And when it comes time to vote, you don't need a unanimous vote as with most juries. You just need a vote of 2/3. Now, if 2/3 of the Senate votes to remove the president from office, then he is removed and the vice president then succeeds him. If for whatever reason the vice president cannot serve, either because he's unwilling, unable, or himself is impeached, then we follow the regular or the natural line of presidential succession. And then we move on to sometimes the third step. Now, the third step would take place in the judiciary. This doesn't really happen often, but once the president is removed from office, the entire process of impeachment is done. But he may have committed several crimes, several illegal acts. So he might be brought up on charges, on criminal or on civil charges, or both sometimes. Most of the time, this doesn't happen for two reasons. The impeachment is very rare, and we tend to think that once the president has been removed from office, pretty much the threat has been neutralized. So that's enough. That serves as enough of a punishment. But even after the impeachment, a president may be tried criminally or civilly and may even be put in jail. So let's move on to the case. As you know, Transparency International turned 25 this year, and they released a list of the 25 most iconic cases in the history of corruption, and we are doing our own little rundown of that list. Today we get to talk about the Azerbaijan Laundromat. Azerbaijan is a country in Eastern Europe, and even though it is not a full member of the European Union, it has dealings with the European Union and the Council of Europe. This will become relevant in a few minutes. Now, what happened here is that Azerbaijan, as most developing countries, has some issues with human rights. And most of the time, most countries are somewhat observed and evaluated on how they defend, apply, and protect human rights. Why? Because they want to have access to different, either groups of countries, clubs of countries, or they want to have access to, sometimes aid or financing. So it might be the case that you apply for a loan with the International Monetary Fund, and they will either grant or deny that loan based on your behavior towards human rights, among other things. Now, Azerbaijan has a troubled history with human rights, and they were being subjected to evaluation by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. So peace. And that meant essentially you get visitors from the assembly, and they talk to the government, they talk to civil servants, they talk to companies, citizens, the press, and they ask them questions, and from those questions they reach one or several conclusions and evaluate your behavior towards human rights. Now, what happened here is that instead of Azerbaijan knew that it was going to be evaluated on human rights by PACE, and instead of simply beefing up their policies and their actions concerning human rights, they decided to instead create a slush fund or a reptile fund. We discussed this in a previous episode, of about $3 billion US, and using that slush fund to bribe the officials from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe into giving Azerbaijan favorable grades. So it's major violations of human rights coded by corruption. Now, in order to do that, the Azerbaijani government created 4 shell companies based out of UK, which moved funds using Danske Bank, which has been largely investigated, and they then turned that money into gold, into luxury items, travel, food, many, the usual things that you use to pay bribes, and they channeled these bribes to the members of the assembly who were in charge of the evaluation. So essentially bribing them in order to get a better grade. Now, this is terrible for many reasons. The amount of money involved is just huge. It was obviously sovereign money, so sovereign funds, money given by the government, which is pretty bad. It involves bribing members of the Assembly of the Council of Europe, which is no small feat. But the worst part is that as of today, nobody has been investigated nor even indicted in Azerbaijan for these acts of corruption. So they essentially have gone unpunished. Okay, let's move on to the typology. As you know, typologies are specific iterations of concrete phenomena. So, for example, a typology for corruption would be the concrete steps that one would take to commit a corrupt act, such as bribing. Now, today we get to talk about malicious prosecution. This is one of those things that can get extremely boring and very technical, but I ask that you bear with me because it is very interesting and very relevant. Now, malicious prosecution is essentially bringing a lawsuit for improper reasons or without cause. So in criminal law, if a malicious prosecution would be if the district attorney or the state's attorney were to bring an action against me without proper cause, without proof, and just to use the judiciary machinery simply to harass me. And this is illegal because it might mean that the state exercises acts of violence against the governed and would be unpunished because it is within the process or within the context of legal prosecution. So malicious prosecution has been made illegal and sometimes even a crime in different countries. Okay, now, so again, malicious prosecution, bringing an action without proof and with malicious intent or with an improper cause. Now, most countries have a legal principle, non bis in idem. That means never 2 times for the same thing. You might know it as double jeopardy. Now, this means that a person cannot be tried, cannot be brought to a trial or charged for the same crime 2 times, more than 1 time. So if prosecutor were to bring me to trial and then either the court or the judge exonerates me from that crime, I cannot be prosecuted for the same crime. Different crimes, yes, but the same crime, no. Never twice for the same crime. So non bis in idem. Now, this principle is very important because in countries where the rule of law is important, in evolved countries, this means that the citizens are protected from malicious prosecution or from violence by the state or from the state actors. So it's a very important principle. However, it can be abused. And how can it be abused? I will give you an example. let's say that I work for a state-owned entity. A state-owned entity is most of the times a company, a regular commercial company, but that is owned by the state and operated by public officials. So let's say that I run a state-owned entity, and I'm the director, so I'm a public official working for the government. Good. As a public official, I have to disclose my income, my holdings, my estate, everything, my assets, everything that I own, everything that I owe, and any conflicts of interest that might occur. Because for the sake of accountability and transparency, it's important that the government and the citizens know on whose side I am or what is important to me. However, if I lie on those statements, on those disclosures, that might be illegal. That's illegal in most countries, and in some countries, it's even a crime. Lying about the assets that you own as a public servant. Now, if because of investigative journalism that came to light, I as the public official who is very clearly involved in corrupt dealings and who has at least lied to the government, might want to get ahead of the whole situation. And as a public official, I might use my power to control the narrative and the discourse that is being brought. I might improperly influence the person who's going to investigate me or even prosecute me, so the state attorney or the district attorney, or for example, a government clearinghouse that is in charge of investigating me. And I might use my influence or my power to improperly influence that person into bringing an action, but doing so improperly. So I, as the investigated party, the accused party, might make the DA bring an action, but do it in the wrong fashion, or do anything that he or she needs to do to exonerate me from that misdeed. Now, this would mean that I would be exonerated not by the person himself or herself, but by the state. And that, under this principle right here, means that I cannot be prosecuted nor investigated for the same conduct ever again. So again, if I did something improper and then I got caught, I want to jump ahead, control the narrative, reach out to a corrupt district attorney or investigator and have him or her pretend to investigate me and then exonerate me, so that then I get exonerated by the state itself and I become untouchable. Okay, so that's it for today. As always, I will leave you with this. Every act of corruption has to be denounced. Please blow the whistle, but do so safely. If you're not sure whether or not what you're looking at is corruption, or you don't really know that you are completely safe, you're physically safe, don't do anything, refrain from acting. Reach out to someone who might be able to help you. Feel free to reach out to us at info@streiner.mx, and we will be glad to help you. But above all, please stay safe. Again, this was The Wife of Caesar. My name is Michel Levien, or Michel Levien, either's fine, and have a happy Monday.